So about a year ago, I made a video called how to make X amount of horsepower on a WRX and an STI. And that is using modifications that I personally buy and use for my own cars. And typically I tend to use something more along the lines like top shelf parts or like the top quality of like top of what you can buy of things. Today we're making that video again, but I'm calling this the BOB series where we're balling on a budget, all right? So we're balling on a budget to make 300 horsepower, 350 horsepower, 400 and 450 wheel horsepower. And I've got the comparisons over from the price from the top shelf parts list over to this parts list also, so that way you can kind of see how much money you're spending roughly and gauge how much you'd be saving or spending if you decided to go the top shelf route part. Now all the parts we're going to be mentioning today in this video, they're ones that I would, if I'm balling on a budget, they're parts that I would personally use. And this list is definitely interchangeable, so if you want to mix and match like parts from the top shelf list over to this like balling on a budget list, you totally can. So we're gonna get right into it. This list is applicable to both WRX and STI. Just keep in mind that with WRXs, your 5 speeds are a little weak. They tend to get a little weak around like the 400 wheel horsepower range when your torque starts getting up there a little bit, so keep that in mind. That is an option if you're looking to STI swap. STI 6 speeds are the way to go for that. So I got my handy dandy lists here. We got a budget build coming up for you guys to actually show this list in action. So first off, 300 wheel horsepower. We're going to be looking at a Tatrix cable. Now, traditionally people would use an access port to be able to tune their WRXs, their STIs, because that's always been the go-to. We're balling on a budget, all right? We don't got $750 to spend on an access port. We got $200 to spend on a Tatrix cable. Now, Tatrix cable is just open tuning software. You can use Carberry, you can use ROM Raider, you can use ECU Flash. There's a lot of different open source platforms that you can use for tuning. I would find a tuner who is kind of well versed in open source tuning because it can be mildly different than using access tuner, and it varies a little bit. So first off, we need something to tune the car with. Tatrix cable, $200. And buy a legitimate Tatrix cable too. Don't buy one of the knockoffs. Like, get a legitimate one. Next up, you're gonna want an intake on that thing. Now, the Cobb, how much is a Cobb SF intake actually? Hold up. How much is this intake? $250. We're going with that. So start things off, we're going with the Cobb SF intake. It's $250. We're not doing a box on this one. We're balling on a budget, so we're gonna try not to heat soak that intake, all right? $250. Next up, you're gonna need a boost controller, baby. So boost controllers are, it doesn't matter what brand you buy for boost controller, you can find the cheapest one out there as long as it is a Mac 3-port boost controller. What all these companies do for the most part is they all buy Mac boost controllers and they stick their label on them. They'll market them a little bit differently and they'll price them a little bit differently. I found the Grimspeed one I think was the cheapest at about $129 for a reliable boost controller. Also, all these parts on this list, like I said, are somewhat reliable ones that I would trust using. So Grimspeed boost controller, $129. Next up, we need a downpipe to let that exhaust flow and to get out of the car, because the downpipe is probably gonna be your biggest gains or best bang for the buck for gains. So NVIDIA catted downpipe. This is still a catted downpipe series. So NVIDIA catted downpipe, $560. Honestly, not terrible for a catted downpipe, especially if you're using open source software. You should be able to get around having a check engine light or a cell for a catalytic converter that is not a Jesse G Sport. The one in the NVIDIA should still work totally fine for what you're doing. That's whatever cat back you're feeling, whatever cat back you want. For this list, I think I went with an NVIDIA N1. If you want to do that, it's like $540. It's honestly not a bad exhaust. I've used it on a lot of the GDs that I've had in the past. So there you go, $540. Get yourself a catback. You can just do it like a straight pipe if you want. I personally don't like straight pipes because it's a little bit too loud for me, but I mean, you know. And then we still gotta add a little bit of reliability in there. There's no skimping out on that, so I am adding in an IAG V3 AOS to the car. If you can find a decent set of catch cans that you'd rather use for cheaper, by all means go that route, but for the most part, if people are going to be following this list, I am still gonna give you those reliability mods to be able to toss in there. So that IAG V3 AOS is something that I'm still going to suggest to you. Now, this should get you damn near spot on to 300 wheel horsepower. Now, if you are on a WRX, your stock turbo may not be able to get you to 300 wheel. If that's the case, I would look at getting a VF like 39, a VF 48, and STI turbo to toss on there. If you're already in STI, you already have that turbo, you're gonna be fine getting to 300 wheel. But that little TD04 that you got in your stock WRX may not get you there. Now, for that first total in parts for that 300 wheel horsepower range, balling on a budget, comes in at about $2,043.08. In comparison over to the top shelf parts that I would normally use on all of my builds, that comes out to about $3,900. So you're saving a decent amount of money by balling on a budget, and you're still getting some good parts that will still work and still get the job done. like I said, some of those biggest savings are going to be that downpipe, that Tatrix cable for tuning, and some of those other parts. We're just trying to find some more reasonably priced parts that will still get the job done. Next up, we're jumping over to 350 wheel horsepower. So we're still going to be carrying over from that list, that Tatrix cable, that Cobb intake, that Grimspeed boost controller, the NVIDIA N1 catback, the IAG AOS, and that NVIDIA catted downpipe. Next up, we're gonna have to do some fueling modifications for this 350 wheel horsepower range. So get yourself an AEM 340 liter per hour fuel pump to be able to drop into that fuel tank. They're still relatively cheap at about $129 for the fuel pump. You could probably get a cheaper option out there. However, I don't trust a lot of fuel pumps out there. I've had a lot of them die on me, especially some of the cheaper end ones that you'll find. So to keep your engine from starving of fuel, get yourself the AEM. Like I said, 120 bucks. It's not terrible. Fuel injectors. Now, normally I would suggest Injector Dynamics to you guys, but because we're balling on a budget today, and I have learned a little bit more about this company, I'm actually pretty happy with them. We're using some FIC 1000cc injectors. Those are significantly cheaper than the Injector Dynamics ones, and they're still pretty good. Honestly, they're still good injectors. For those FIC 1000cc's, you can get those for $435 for a set of top feed fuel injectors, which honestly is not bad for a set of 1000s. 10 out of 10, that's like good savings right there. I've used FICs before. I know people have used FICs, you're really not gonna have a lot of issues with them. All right, for turbo selection, we are gonna have to swap out that turbo at this point. So we're getting rid of that VF series stock STI turbo, and we're jumping over to a Blausch 16G. Now the 16G will get you up to 350 wheel horsepower, and it's a relatively affordable turbo at that, coming in at about $1,095 MSRP. I'm sure you can find it on sale somewhere a little bit cheaper as well. But $1,095 for a turbo that's gonna get you to 350 wheel and do it reliably without having any issues, because Blausch is a good company for turbochargers. They're not gonna give you a lot of problems, they're not gonna die on you, anything like that. So I'm still trying to give you some reliable options that are still relatively like balling on a budget priced for this stuff. And you can find a lot of these parts secondhand too, to be able to save some of that money. But if you're buying secondhand parts, obviously make sure the parts that you're buying are in good serviceable condition and not like ratted out. You're gonna want some NGK 2309 spark plugs. Please don't cheap out on spark plugs or something cheaper. NGKs are about 30 bucks. And then also you're gonna want a turbo inlet to match that intake and new turbo that you got. The Tomei is a relatively affordable one. I think it was like 160 bucks for a Tomei turbo inlet, and they come in a couple different colors, I believe. So that's honestly not bad. For that 350 wheel horsepower range, if you're looking to do it balling on a budget this style, you can do it for $3,990. Keep in mind these prices are before taxes, because I don't know where you live, and taxes definitely vary across the world, so this is all pre-tax. But compared over to the top shelf parts list that I would typically use on my builds, that comes in at about $6,600. So you're saving $2,600 by balling on a budget and still using good reputable parts. Now 400 wheel horsepower range. At this point, 400 wheel horsepower, Type RA short block. I've got one sitting right back there. They're relatively affordable. You can get them from Flatirons Tuning for, I want to say around $2,300 is what they're going for right now. They're solid short blocks. Like no, they're not a built motor like this one is here behind me. But those Type RA short blocks will hold power up to, honestly, reliably, like 450, 460 with a good tune and quality parts put on them. So we're going with an RA short block on this car. And then carrying over from that last list, that Tatrix cable, that that Cobb intake, the Grimspeed boost controller, the NVIDIA catted downpipe, NVIDIA N1 catback, IAG AOS, that AEM 340 liter per hour fuel pump, those FIC 1000s, that Tomei turbo inlet, those NGK 2309s. Now we're jumping into a couple extra things here. So we've already mentioned that short block with an additional $2,300. Now for fuel lines, I do this on my top shelf stuff also. I hate calling it top shelf because it sounds bougie, but I promise I'm not trying to make it sound bougie. It's just like I don't know how to say it without it sounding douchey, okay? Dash 6 feed lines. I personally make all of my own. It's way cheaper than buying pre-made fuel line kits out there, and you can make them look way better. Like for this one, for 20 feet of Dash 8 fuel line on this motor and for that car with fittings, I think I spent $100 on Amazon for the Evil Energy stuff. Dash 6 is even cheaper at $80. You're gonna want some Dash 6 fuel line. Now with running Dash 6 fuel line, you're also gonna need some fuel rails for the car. So IAG, surprisingly, was still one of the cheaper options out there for fuel rails, coming in about $179 for a set of IAG fuel rails. 10 out of 10, like snag those. You're gonna need a fuel pressure regulator. A reliable option that I came across was the AEM fuel pressure regulator at about $132, which really isn't bad. Jumping up, turbo size again, because now we're shooting for that 400 wheel horsepower mark. I've used Tomika, or Tomika, I don't know how you prefer to pronounce it. We're gonna go Tomioka. I've used Tomioka racing products in the past, and the quality on them seemed to be pretty decent. I've never personally ran one of their turbos, but I know a couple people who do have them, and they've had pretty decent success with them. So we're gonna be using a Tomioka TR TD05 18G for that 400 wheel horsepower range, which comes in at about $1,190, which really isn't too bad for one of those turbos. It comes with an upgraded internal wastegate, a diaphragm, everything like that. So you should be solid for that 400 wheel horsepower range while still staying internally gated. And then at this point, we're also going to be bumping up to a larger intercooler. We're going with the Mishimoto top mount, coming in at $640. I think it's a 4.5 inch thick core, or it's either 4 inch or 4.5 inch thick core, which should reliably do 450 wheel, no problem with that Mishimoto top mount. If you want to be a little more bougie, you can get the Process West or something along those lines, but for the most part, it's a pretty solid setup to get you to that 450 wheel horsepower mark. Now, we are going to be swapping exhaust manifolds and up pipe at this point. Now, I've noticed this, and this is quite affordable. A lot of us love Tomei unequal length headers, Tomei equal length headers. For this list, I'm going to suggest you get equal length. If you want to get unequal length, by all means, you can get unequal length. That might bring power down just a hair. But if you really want to retain that Subaru rumble, that Subaru sound, you can get unequal length. Snag a set of IAG headers, whether they're unequal length or equal length. They're the exact same header as Tomei. Tomei and IAG, same header, same 100%. You can compare them side by side, exactly the same header. Those headers come in at about $637.49 for the header and the up pipe itself, which is obviously a pretty good savings deal right there. Now, with all of this added power, you're gonna need a clutch. I was looking into some questionable cheap clutches, none that I personally would use. Like I said, all the parts we're talking about on this list, I would personally use for a budget-friendly build, which you guys will actually see coming up here soon. We're doing a budget-friendly build, but I couldn't cheap out on a clutch. We're going with a stage 1 organic X clutch, coming in at about $536, and just resurfacing that OEM flywheel. There's no need for a lightweight flywheel or any of that stuff at this point. So, balling on a budget to get yourself up to 400 wheel horsepower, you're looking at about $8,592. Not terrible. Like I said, it can be done cheaper if you buy like second-hand parts, used parts, or anything like that, to bring that cost down a little bit more. But if you were to compare that $8,592 over to the top shelf stuff that I would normally use, that top shelf stuff is going to come in at about $12,777. And these top shelf parts are the ones that I listed over in that other video that we made for how to make X amount of horsepower. This is just the budget-friendly version. Now, I'm stopping us at 450 wheel for the budget-friendly stuff, because if you're looking to make over 450 wheel horsepower on a budget, you're on your own on that one. Because at that point, I would say start looking into some of the higher top shelf parts for some things. But from that prior 400 wheel horsepower, we're going to be carrying this stuff over. OEM Type RA short block, open source Tatrix cable, Cobb intake, Grim Speed boost controller, NVIDIA catted downpipe, NVIDIA N1 catback, IAG AOS, AEM 340 liter fuel pump, that Tomei turbo inlet, the spark plugs, the IAG fuel rails, the Dash 6 fuel line, the AEM fuel pressure regulator. Now here's, and the Mishimoto top mount. As well as the X clutch and the IAG. So the only things that are really going to be changing from that 400 wheel horsepower mark up to this 450 wheel horsepower mark, we're going to swap injectors. So we're no longer going to be using those we're no longer going to be using those FIC 1000 cc's. We're going to bump up to FIC 1200 cc's. Those come in at about $479. Now, if you want at this point, you can run E85. You're gonna have to run 2 separate tunes for it, especially being open source or Tatrix. You do not need to get an ethanol sensor. You do need to test that ethanol though before you are putting it in your car to ensure that it is the proper ethanol percentage that you were tuned on. Ethanol sensors are kind of like a fail-safe, so that way you're not putting bad ethanol in the car when the car thinks it has E70, when in reality you're putting in like E40 because the pump you got it from was a little bit diluted that day. So if you're gonna be running E85 at this point, just ensure that you're making sure that you're doing all your stuff properly before putting that stuff in. Now we're also gonna be swapping turbos. We're gonna be specifically getting the FP Blue 73 HTZ. Now that turbo comes in about $1,376, but that turbo can carry you to 450 wheel by pushing that turbo. But like I said, we're balling on a budget. We're not overbuilding excessively, and we are trying to make our money stretch here. So that FP Blue will get you there. But like I said, you're gonna have to push that FP Blue quite a ways. This is the top-notch, top-of-the-line FP Blue that you're gonna be buying. You push it real good, it'll get you there. But those are really the only things that we're really gonna be changing on that 450 wheel horsepower list. Total cost for that comes in about $8,823, which really isn't crazy more than the 400 wheel horsepower range. And then compared to the top shelf stuff, $13,570, so you're saving a good amount of money there. Now, I say this all the time, budget stuff, you can totally build power, you can totally build a car on budget-friendly stuff. I just wanted to get these price comparisons and these parts lists out there because you guys have asked me for a budget-friendly version of that video before. So there's a budget-friendly version. Like I said, all the parts on that list I personally would use on a budget-friendly build. But anyways, that's all I got for you guys on this one. If you have any questions, if there's any parts or anything like that that you feel like I missed, or if there's anything questionable in the parts list that you think I put in there, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Help others out also, because that is the whole point of these videos, is to help you guys help others, so that way we can eliminate confusion, help people streamline and be able to do their stuff with their builds. So that's all I got for you guys on this one. If you like the video, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit that like button, turn it black, blue, green, yellow, purple, silver, cyan, whatever color it turns for you. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to be, which, like I said, we got some budget-friendly stuff and something else. There's some stuff coming up that I haven't even mentioned that I am extremely excited for. That's gonna be happening tomorrow. So if you want to subscribe, feel free. One of these corners, no idea which one I'll put it in quite yet, but with that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies. Woo!